So I wanted to just sort of introduce this new project or this new small book that I wrote last year, just with some introductory comments before I delve into the sort of some of the particular passages around the book. So I'm going to sort of talk and do some reading to give you a sense of what the book is about. So first, I wanted to just say a few things about this book in terms of the writing of the book, because it was really my COVID book. I had completed this research over sort of a period from 2013 to 2019. And I had just completed the research in 2019, unbeknownst to ourselves that, we would be all in lockdown for the next 2 years. So lockdown actually provided the setting for me to sort of think about what I wanted to write in a really nice way. And this book is partly the product of sort of the pleasures of writing and reading and thinking about where you are in your life and your own trajectory and your own career. So another aspect I wanted to bring up is the idea of writing short books, which this book is. It's 40,000 words, like 38,000 words. I was over the limit, so they made me cut a chapter out, unfortunately, on food. But the idea is that, we read less, we read more quickly, more careful practices of writing and the act of writing. So this became a short book, is what Cambridge is called Elements. And I was invited to write a book on heritage. And I thought, what do I want to write about? And I came back to Goa because, as some of you know, I've been working on Goa for 25 years. So for me, this was a book, almost an homage to a place that I love and that I have changed in relation to the changing place itself. So this book very much reflects my own sort of personal growth as a scholar and academic working in Goa, and my changing topics and interests, as well as Goa itself changing. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. I also wanted to just pick up on the theme of decolonization. As many of you know, I've written extensively on the history of, the Estado de India and San Francisco Xavier, which was my first book, which was really a sort of twin history of the state and church over the longue durée, which in some ways you could say I'm always been writing about decolonization. And then my second book, which was Portuguese decolonization, was taking on sort of the materiality of the distinctiveness of the Portuguese decolonization process in Mozambique and connecting it to Goa and through the Indian Ocean and the ways in which Goa's particular decolonization of 61 sort of had these far-flung diasporic effects throughout the Lusophone world. And that's sort of, so I came to this project really thinking about heritage as a form of decolonization and thinking about the ways in which heritage can reflect that decolonized setting in this sort of, in more personal and political ways. So this book is really about portraits, and I wanted to sort of give an idea of persons, places, landscapes, objects, things that I deeply love in Goa, and that sort of what I wanted to do. And here I'm going to move on to this next quote. This from Arturo Escobar. This is a quote from Designs for the Pluriverse, Radical Interdependence, Autonomy, the Making of Worlds. And this quote really came to me when I was working on the book, and I thought this is really what I'm trying to do. I won't read it for you because I think everyone can read it. So thinking about sort of the ethics of care and applying an ethics of care to heritage and to heritage practices, and really sort of thinking carefully about how to write about people who in my sense, have an ethics of care, of thinking about heritage and Goa and its place in the future, and thinking about a place like Goa, which is very globalized in a way that some people don't know, some people do know, but to give it its proper place or due in the world, and almost as not in reaction to globalization, but offering new forms of globalization through heritage practices. Okay, what I'm going to do now is go through sort of some of the chapters and the sort of framing of the book. Okay. And I should just tell you that all the drawings that you'll see, the graphics design, were beautifully done by Orijit Sen, who's a Delhi Goa-based designer. He runs this beautiful shop called People Tree, which actually is just now closed, but he lives in Goa most half the year and now more full-time. I'll say more about that. And I wrote a chapter about his Mopsa Market project, which I'll say more on now as well. And as I asked him if he would be willing to do the drawings, because I couldn't find what I wanted in terms of the visuals for the book. And he sort of captured something about this ethics of care that I was really interested in such a careful way and beautiful way. And he asked what was so interesting about the visuals, and I'm just going to place they're part of the PowerPoint. So you'll see each one for each chapter that's part of the book. And I can just show you the actual book here. He asked me to send him portrait photos of the people I was writing about. And so it was an interesting exercise where I went online and found the photos that I thought reminded me of the people I was trying to write about, because my photos of them felt so flat and one-dimensional in some ways. So he then captured, through his graphics design, he's a brilliant designer, those people through these graphics. And I felt like I was really, when he sent me the images, I was so impressed, and they were so thoughtfully done in the ways in which he read the book as well, and tried to sort of match together these people and places. Okay. So actually, I'm gonna, go back to this just to think about that for a minute. Okay, so this element is rooted in ethnographic ways of seeing and writing in order to think through the relationship between heritage and design, an underdeveloped area within heritage studies. So each of the books and the elements is heritage and something else, and I decided to choose the concept of design. I'm also interested in thinking about a heritage's placeness as a laboratory for different design projects and practices, with acts of design involving dimensions of training and expertise, skill and labor, specialized craft and industry, commitments to ideas and places, and judgments or dispositions in particular ways. For the case in hand, I explore how certain practitioners of design, for example, architects, urban planners, photography, museum curators, writers and publishers, fashion designers, and painters, use a specific heritage site involving its signature details of history and culture as a source of inspiration for other kinds of aesthetic work involving the old and new, the experiential and the affective. I then examine the multiple ways these ideas get translated into material heritage objects, be it a building, a book, an article of clothing, a photo display, a painting, or a museum exhibit. While some of these are more classic design subjects, such as architecture or clothing, others are new ones, such as a market or a book, which perhaps require more careful thinking about the design work put into each different object, as I do in the sections that follow. So the heritage makers I profile were selected precisely for their thought, care, and commitment to Goa as a space and place. In other words, it's not simply the transformation of something old by way of new design ideas that defines heritage. It is rather about the biography of an individual involved and their changing relationship to Goa over a lengthy period that shows a more dynamic and performative heritage landscape in the making. Furthermore, and not surprisingly, these same persons know and respect one another, often through their design work, and make up a heritage community of sorts, one committed to Goa's continued and sustainable heritization. Okay, and then I wanted to go back to this. Okay. And again, you can see the detailing and sort of the images that Origit created with this idea of the mosaic and where Goa is, and the sort of kaleidoscopic aspect of the different heritage practitioners that I write about. Ethnography becomes my entry point into their life roles and design ideas and practices. Here I conceive ethnography itself as a form of design or specialized craft involving a set of multiple methodologies that I've put together. And here I'm involved in traditional anthropological fieldwork technologies, such as conducting life histories and interviews alongside participant observation. Secondly, it was field work that takes place over the long durée through multiple time visits. Again, I've been going to Goa since 1994, which in turn reveals both changes in Goa's heritage landscape and the creative changing practices of the set of heritage makers. There's also an auto-ethnographic dimension to this long-term engagement that reveals my own set of changing research topics and personal relationships to these heritage practitioners. Thirdly, it involves spatial and visual mapping and close study of design projects, building towards what is a growing subfield in the discipline called design ethnography. Fourthly, my ethnographic design equally involves online digital research, an expanding area for gathering data, including interviews, extracts, and visual content, and websites often designed by these same individual practitioners. They're integral to the fieldwork process. In other words, it's the in-person, the online that supplement one another through what has recently been called a multimodal approach. In other words, the word is patchwork ethnography, is one of combining long-term classical fieldwork methods and timed multiple visits with encounters and writings of self, design, foci, and online research. and is also one that is derived from and tailored to the specific heritage space and place of Goa. Okay, so this element also exposes, just briefly to conclude this section, the globality of global South locations. And here I'm really invested in thinking about that. What does it mean to talk about the globality of global South? Showcases a range of dynamic heritage practitioners who are contributing distinct formations of globality through their design objects, sites, and practices. We could also see these heritage projects as practice less in opposition to globalization, but rather being integral to new forms of globalization. I also suggest a central role of heritage and design in making certain kinds of dwelling, and in here the idea of the entwining of the urban and the rural, both possible and meaningful in the global South, and I'll say more about that as well. These new sustainable lifestyle formations are taking place the world over as a result of the increasing congestion, high rates of pollution, and difficulties of living in global city spaces that are increasingly becoming nondescript places of supermodernity, to use the words of Marc Auger, where one is anywhere and nowhere at the same time, and mobility is restricted due to the overpopulation of people and things. These conditions of urban living have, of course, been worsened by the global coronavirus pandemic. And again, I was writing this during that time. Instead, and even more so now, there's an active return to history and culture in search of alternative forms of the good life. And this is, again, something I've been interested in thinking about in global hinterland pockets the world over. They, in turn, promote an ease of mobility within localized spaces by way of innovative features that restore, revive, and repurpose heritage through careful and clever design. In a sense, I'm proposing an ethnography of heritage futures and smaller community-based heritage building through a theory and method of design, two aspects that I take up later in my conclusion. Lastly, it's my long-term engagement with Goa that has placed me in this unique position to foreground a specific case study of heritage and design for this new series on critical heritage studies from Cambridge. Okay, so I wanted to give you a sense of this idea of designing heritage and ethnography as a form of design, as sort of the framing. And, you know, obviously the book has a longer discussion around design work and what I mean by design, and thinking through ethnography as a form of design, and thinking about concepts of the good life, and thinking about the hinterland, which I actually have an edited book coming out with two Dutch colleagues and a South African colleague on planetary hinterlands, extraction, abandonment, and care, that's coming out with Palgrave. And it should be out in the next month or so. It's being printed right now, so it's quite exciting. And that was also a COVID project, which interestingly came a little bit out of this book, my project on hinterlands in Goa, and thinking then through hinterlands in South Africa, where I'm based. Okay, so I wanted to then start going to sort of different sections of the book. Okay, so Goa Dreaming sets up my own historical relation and engagement with Goa the place through a series of encounters, visits, and experiences. It is an auto-ethnographic reflective piece that sets up my research on Goa's hinterland, heritage, and design landscape. And I just want to read sort of, I thought the best way to give you a sense of this just to read brief snippets. Okay. Sorry, I marked it. Okay. I'm just taking again little extracts. So this is this first chapter called Goa Dreaming. I visit Goa once again in February 2015 to attend and participate in Goa Photo, organized by Lola McDougall, who's featured in section 8. I return in November 2017 to attend the second Goa Photo, staying in the village of Saligao where the event will take place. I rent a small cottage located on the premises of an old Indo-Portuguese Goan house. Lola and I baptized it the doll house due to its miniature size. Lola had found the place while scouting out potential sites for photography festival. It's perfectly located. I wander through this village that I know well, looking for historic markers from the back of my mind. I find my daughter's old daycare center run by Lorraine, which has moved in the interim down a narrow alleyway that I would have never noticed before, and discover a labyrinth of old Goan houses. I walk to nearby Cantare in the evenings to listen to jazz and have a drink. I visit Divya at Literate and pick up some new bookmarks that feature Frida, her much-loved dog, who has since passed away. I ask after a book I've been wanting and end up buying instead a copy of Goa Writer-in-Residence and Mitav Ghosh's most recent book, The Great Derangement, which takes on the timely topic of climate change in the era of the Anthropocene. I'm going to skip a little bit here. I returned to Goa in 2018 for a 2-week artist residency in the remote village of Chikli and spent my time contemplating, thinking, writing, and walking inside Goa's heritage landscape. I returned once again and to Goa in 2019 for 2 months. Extremely hot and humid, for the monsoon winds are building up. I swim in my friend's luxurious pool to cool myself down and meet them for drinks in the early evenings. I revisit old haunts and finish up my fieldwork and interviews, enjoying this precious time in Goa's hinterland. I start planning ahead for my next visit to take place in February 2020, time for the inauguration of Wendell Roderick's Moda Goa Museum and Research Center, not knowing that a global pandemic and an untimely death was just around the corner would drastically change the whole world. So that's just sort of one little brief section. Okay. So again, that first piece sort of sets up my own relationship to this place and my own growth and development, and Goa's changing relationship. And what's interesting to map is sort of my relationship to Goa and Goa's relationship to the internet, which is sort of parallel in interesting ways, and makes for interesting sort of a global landscape in some ways. Okay. My third section, and this is where I introduce Arijit Sen. Sorry. Go back to my reading of him. Okay. My third section is a portrait of graphic designer Arijit Sen and his innovative mapping MAPSA project run through Goa University. The MAPSA market is a historic colonial bazaar that is still very much in use by locals and foreigners alike, and which includes generations of traders selling a range of Goan and intangible heritage food items: coconut leaf baskets, Goan pau, bread, rock salt, prawns, and pork sorpatel, to name a few. I helped map its various sections and stalls by way of photographs, videos, life histories, and drawings, with groups of Goan students over 2 short courses that took place in September and October 2013. Participant observation in this design project provided the basis for my analysis. I then returned several times afterwards to look at its future iterations, as well as it's still ongoing, and the fact that it's still ongoing and has developed a digital life of its own. Okay. Again, there I'm going to read a little snippet. Arijit very much believes in the idea of, quote, thinking people who choose to live in Goa, end quote. It is something that very much resonated with me when he said it. As his daughter grew older and he and his family returned to Delhi as their permanent base, he still came back often to their village home in Kordrum, which at the time was still only accessible by ferry. Back in Delhi, he had paired up with the restaurateur Satish Warrior, setting up Gunpowder, a restaurant specializing in South Indian cuisine, with the People Tree Design Shop next door in the trendy neighborhood of House Village. They decided to have a go at the same successful collaboration setup in Goa, which they opened in 2012 in a rented house in the village of Asagao, unsure if people would come as they had not advertised it beforehand. Word of mouth worked, for the restaurant and the shop were full on opening night, he tells me, as just about everyone in Goa knew about it. He had found a work-life balance, one that allowed him equal amounts of time in Goa and Delhi to do his designing and thinking. Here, the theme of living between 2 places and design work is being shaped by these different experiences is an important one, and that will resonate with the other heritage makers profiled in this book. And again, a lot of the heritage practitioners I chose were people who could be Goan, not Goan. The whole point was not to make it just about Goans living in Goa, but but also including Goans, obviously, who had lived overseas, had had different kinds of experiences within India, within other countries, and had come back and sort of brought those perspectives of the rural and the urban to their experience of living in Goa, and was enabled by many things, by many of the amenities available in Goa. Okay. And you can see that, Arijit did this own drawing himself, and it's quite beautiful, the detailing there. Okay, you guys following along? That's very quiet. Yeah? Okay, my fourth section is a tale of two Goan tailors, Wendell Roderick and Savia John, whom I interviewed in 2013 to 2014, and on the latter again in 2019. Mentor and student respectively, they are both products of a longer threaded history of Goan tailoring, identity making, and diaspora formation. And I think Ricardo knows that I've written about a little bit about the Goan tailors in Zanzibar. As Goan Catholics stayed at home or moved elsewhere, they took advantage of the everyday Western skills they learned from their Portuguese colonizers and transformed them into highly prized professions, specifically cooking, tailoring, and photography. As I have suggested elsewhere, these civilizing traits became their signature markers of modernity that crossed the Indian Ocean with them as imperial citizens. That's a term from Thomas Metcalfe's work, in which they relied on to find or create pockets of work in places such as British India and British East Africa, where such training and skills, and in particular tailoring Western dress for white settler colonial populations, were in high demand. Wendell and Savio each turning the Goan heritage object of cloth into different design projects for today. Wendell has been designing Goa into his clothes since the 1980s and created the first line of resort wear for India. He has also focused on the history of Goan clothing, authoring a book on the history of Indo-Portuguese sartorial designs entitled Moda Goa, History and Style, which was published in 2012, and has been involved in establishing Goa's first costume museum in his ancestral village of Kovale, which was to be opened in 2020, but he passed away, and then it was postponed to 2022, and now there is some suggestion that it might be later this year. Savio undertook an internship with Wendell early on in his career before establishing his own label. He is a clothing designer with a, quote, quirky go-and take on fashion. That's Wendell describing Savio. One that relies exclusively on a range of Indian cottons and natural dyes. Savio designs his dress collection from his ancestral home in the village of Sealam for a steady clientele based largely in Delhi and Mumbai. He also sells his fashion line by way of close friend and muse Sasha Mendez and her specialty shop in Panjim. That's why I include her in this chapter. She will also feature in this chapter for a parallel approach to Goan heritage design and cloth. Okay, so that's okay. So as you can see, each chapter, or they call them sections because it's a short book, is tied to particular people, objects, and places. And a lot of the setting again is in the hinterland. So I wanted to write not about the tourism in Goa, which I have written about, but move inland and see what was happening in this sort of vibrant hinterland of Goa. Okay. Let's go to book. Okay. In this fifth section, I explore the book as an object of heritage and design in Goa. I sketch a portrait of two heritage makers who keep the literary and the scholarly alive in Goa today. Divya Kapoor, a former advocate, does so by way of a bookshop called Literati that revives a reading culture and a love of books more generally. Frederick Noronha, a former journalist, does so by way of a small alternative academic press called Goa 1556 that he created, in which he published a short monographs on Goan history and culture. I followed closely their innovative design projects over 7 years, have been involved in various aspects of them at different moments, and seen how they have grown and adapted, heritagizing the book, both the act of reading, the art of publishing for a diverse Goan community, including its widespread diaspora. Okay, and just to give you a bit of sense of each of the characters, being in the book business is hard and always precarious, Divya tells me. She is constantly doing market research on the latest global figures to assess the increasingly worrisome book situation. There are even times when she thinks she will not make it financially and will have to shut up shop, or close shop, I should say, as everyone is both buying and reading fewer books, turning to Kindle and e-formats instead, or not reading at all. Interestingly, however, she has observed that the majority of the tourists on the beaches of Goa are still reading actual material books, a detail that helps confirm her enduring commitment to their valuation. Also, having famous writer Amitav Ghosh in residence part-time in Goa has helped promote the idea of reading the book. Despite these hardships, she perseveres, and I see in these moments how much Divya has designed Literati to be a center of and for the book as a heritage object and a thriving reading culture. Increasingly a form of heritage in itself, if you think about reading and what's happening to it, with this practice very much in global decline. And it is for Goa itself, and one that comes out of her own love of books. Okay. Okay. Just as Divya is committed to creating a specialized place where books and a reading culture are curated and revived, Frederick too is committed to the idea and object of the book in Goa, but from a different perspective. Over the years of visiting Goa and browsing shelves in various bookshops in and around Goa, I started noticing a series of small, slender books with a neatly italicized press name, Goa, 1556, printed on the spine as if mirrored in water. These books always stood out and tended to be of interest to me, given my focus on a range of topics pertaining to Goa and my own scholarly research. I also appreciated the press's clever name, as the first Gutenberg printing press in all of India and Asia arrived in Goa via the Jesuits in the year 1556, 14 years after the arrival of Basque missionary Francisco Xavier in Goa to start up the Society of Jesus, of course, the topic of my first book, The Relic State. In other words, the press's name immediately signals Goa's rich missionary and colonial history and print cultures, and employs as a way to continue the heritage practice of bookmaking and reading cultures, but at a very different historical moment with a post-colonial public in mind. That is for a Goa that, quote, needs a voice to articulate its own priorities. And that's from Frederick himself, end quote. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. How am I doing on time, Sophia? I've lost track.
Fine.
Fine. Okay. I have about maybe 10 more minutes, I think.
Yes,
Okay.
perfect.
Okay, great. So architecture. My sixth section is a portrait of Gerard de Cunha, who has worked on various design projects involving Goan architecture as heritage over the past 25 years. These include a book and small museum on the historic Indo-Portuguese styled houses of Goa and as well as the recent controversial restoration of the 16th century Portuguese Reis Magos fort. And lastly, the preservation of an archive and studio space dedicated to famed cartoonist Mario Miranda's illustrations of daily Goan life. And I have an ongoing project with Joana Passos, based in Braga, and on Mario Miranda's illustrations for Air India. We're writing a piece together on that, which is really, that sort of came out of this project. So, and her own passion and interest in writing about Mario Miranda. I've slowly come to know Gerard over a space of 20 years, have been observing and now writing about his evolving design ideas and architectural plans that very much show an enduring commitment to an investment in Goa as a place. And I'm just going to read a snippet here. Reflecting on the Reis Magos Fort project a year and a half after its completion in November 2013, Gerard tells me he likes to think of monuments as sites of regeneration or empowerment for and in dialogue with the community, and that a successful renovation is one that honors heritage at the same time that it uses new technologies to modernize and make a heritage site accessible, practical, and sustainable for use in the now. Furthermore, it is these guiding principles of restoration work more generally that in the end proved a success as a model for opening the doors to additional renovation projects on heritage sites in and around Goa. He has since been invited to give numerous lectures and tours on the basis of what is now regarded as his thoughtful design work on the fort. His marrying of commerce and heritage creates a sustainable economic model for other buildings in need of renovation work. His comments very much resonate for me as an ethics of care and design work that could very easily apply to other heritage practitioners that I've chosen to profile in this book. Okay, and then Mario. In the aftermath of Mario de Miranda's death, Gerard also started up the Mario Gallery, taking over the front room of his architectural office and filling it with original prints on display. You can see some of the Mario images in here. In the upstairs area with a limited range of Mario merchandise for sale on the first floor, including prints, postcards, and pillows illustrated with Mario's popular cartoon images. The Mario Gallery, both a physical space and an online one, is also very much a design place that pays homage to Goa's most beloved cartoonist, who is simultaneously considered a Goan personality and a figure who heritagized Goa itself through his design of cartoons as sharp social commentary. Okay. And I guess I wanted to just make a comment that in my writing, I don't know if I could use the word judgment, but there's a way in which I wanted to just show what the projects were, what people were interested in, the detailings of it, to give a sense of what's happening, as opposed to me giving you a judgment on, is it good that Gerard is merchandising all of Mario's products? I mean, that's a complicated question to respond to, and I didn't want to make a comment about that. I wanted to let it be, and that's what he's doing. And it was partly financial for his widow and his sons, but also for his love of his work. But maybe he's taken it too far. There's all sorts of things going on with the commercialization aspects, and we can talk about that in the Q&A if people are interested. Okay, my last chapter on the village, and you can see the two portraits there. And here I need to go back 1 second. Section 7 is a portrait of Goa's villages, where I've lived and worked alongside many creative persons. I first focused on the villages of Saligao, Chicli, and Moira, which I know intimately, having recently spent time living and experiencing daily village life in all three of them. So a lot of my timed visits, I would go spend time in a different village and live there to get a sense of what village life is like. And I have a longer section around the idea of thinking about the village in Goa and its particular historicities. In relation to colonialism and the system of comunidades, and then in the sort of post-colonial Goa. The section is simultaneously a portrait of two Goa-based heritage practitioners in two locations, North and South Goa. And again, I wanted to give attention to the South because I know the North better, and I feel like I still haven't fully written enough about the South in this book, so it's a little bit more balanced towards the North, but I at least wanted to include someone. Lola McDougall is a Spanish curator and photography specialist who's been living in North Goa for 12 years and has fashioned Goa's architectural landscape, including its Indo-Portuguese Catholic churches, houses, and village interiors as backdrops for her biannual photo festivals in February 2015 and November 2017, both of which I attended and was involved in setting up and writing about. Savia Viegas is a fiction writer and painter whose life journey returned her to Goa from Mumbai later in life in an unexpected way. I spent time with the novelist and painter in her ancestral home in Carmona and gained a sense of how the village functions as a medium and canvas for her writing and visual projects. Okay. And then just to give you a little bit of a snippet on Lola. Okay. With the domestic and the photographic engaged in a visual dialogue inside various lived ancestral homes located in the village of Saligao, Goa Photo 2017 showcased perfectly the potential of heritage to be used as a setting for a range of contemporary visual design projects, as well as the ability to work creatively with and inside living heritage in order to perform itself, showcasing both ancestral homes and contemporary photography equally to a larger Goan community. Furthermore, Lola's hand-drawn maps for her participant observation walking tours in the village of Saligao worked much like the way Origits did for his Mapping Mapsa project, which was featured in section 3, both as a form of experiential memory making and storytelling of a village, its changing life worlds, and a cast of characters. Her Goa Photo series also potentially opens up new heritage processes by way of a combination of methodologies and design ideas, walking, mapping, ethnography, and photography. Lola would continue to employ this conceptual framing using the village of Aldona, where she had lived for several years and had come to know intimately both its interior and exterior spaces, as the set design and performance stage for her third biannual Goa Photo, which was staged over 3 days in 2019, which I was sorry to miss that event this time around, thinking I was going to be going to the next one. Okay, and then for Savia Viegas, we finally get to the subject at hand, which initially drew me to her work, her elegiac book, Song Blue, 2018. For me, her novel perfectly shows how Carmona, standing in for Goan village life more generally, is a heritage object that is under the threat of disappearance. Carmona is also the design set for a series of paintings that accompany the text, but also stand alone as a visual story unto itself, for whose palette she chose the color blue. With a careful crafting of words, the Goan village is shown to be an increasingly hollowed heritage object that Savia recuperates in some sense by both living inside and writing about it, setting her fiction inside its complex folds. For Savia, the color blue reflects all the worldly influences of a range of historic artists, including musicians, painters, and filmmakers on her own palette. It also says so much about dwelling inside Goa's villages, as felt, sensorial, sonic, and lived heritage, including its basis in Roman Catholic iconography and Portuguese fado blues music. In other words, blue becomes the affective color of Goa's heritage. It's expressive, melancholic, and musical, and perhaps even religious for some, quality for a range of persons dwelling in its hinterland. More generally, it is the fading, emptying out of Goan village life, and is increasingly labeled other, that Savia importantly represents and resurrects through Twin's act of writing and painting for herself and her readers, and includes a number of Goans living in Goa and or abroad. She inhabits and performs a Goan village way of life, suggesting an ethics of return by way of her own life example, one that also suggests its enduring value and viability for Goa's future generations. Okay, and then I'm just going to conclude. In my afterword, Goa by design. This element has been about exploring a dynamic heritage and design landscape in a globalized place called Goa. It offers up a series of portraits of an exciting range of contemporary heritage makers involved in 5 themed design projects: market, cloth, book, architecture, village, suggesting in some sense that they play a central role in transforming Goa's hinterland into an innovative design and studio space that is very much in process. These creative persons are equally committed to designing Goa's heritage futures, making for an enriched way of life that leads by example and that thinks carefully about old and new and sustainable and ethical design aspects, choices, and materials in the Anthropocene. It includes, Okay, I'm gonna skip that part. Okay. These globalized locals have taken inspiration from Goa's heritage landscape, both tangible and intangible, and interpreted into a range of contemporary design objects. Moreover, the majority of them have journeyed to or arrived in Goa by way of elsewhere, bringing their diverse educational training and experiences abroad with them. They came initially in search of an alternative cosmopolitanism to be found inside Goa, and are in some sense actively producing and shaping the contours of that alternative cosmopolitanism itself. And just a last point, this thriving community located is also very much guiding Goa's future iterations, which I suspect will continue to grow and develop in interesting and surprising ways. Even as I can only gesture to its future in broad strokes, to be one of renewed investment and a sense of resilience in the face of the COVID pandemic, I'll most likely be innovative, combining this set of heritage makers and shakers alongside a newer, younger set. They will take inspiration from the groundwork that has already been put in place by this former group of thoughtful and creative persons in order to ponder heritage and design in exciting and complex, personalized, and political ways. Okay, and just a final. And lastly, this book is also about my own enduring relationship with a special place and space, small vignettes and ethnographic fragments and encounters, including of daily village life and contemplations of self and other. I also conceive of my ethnography as a form of research design unto itself, one that operates in simultaneity to Goa designing its own heritage landscape in a sense of self over a 25-year time frame. Both are in flux and always dynamic, always relational to another. And I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.